and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And in the news this week, the Obama administration does indeed weigh in against the constitutionality of Proposition 8.
I said I didn't care if they did.
We will talk about that. It is a breakthrough, and one we were some people were working for, not Ann, and the limitations of the stand that they're taking, and all the others that filed amicus briefs.
Amazing
the whole,
list.
Everybody's getting into the act.
You Jimmy Durante now?
Yes.
The Violence Against Women Act was renewed by the House of Representatives with the LGBT provisions intact. Amazing.
Chattanooga, Tennessee got its first out gay elected official.
There's an arrest and conflicting stories in the murder of the out gay politician in Mississippi.
Bradley Manning pleads guilty and faces 20 years in prison on the stuff that he pleaded guilty about. But Obama's prosecutors want to try him for more.
And the Boy Scouts just can't catch a break these days. Carly Rae Jepsen and Train, who were supposed to perform at their annual jamboree, have canceled pending a change in their anti-gay policies.
The ex-Pope's boyfriend will live with him in the Vatican while serving the new Pope as well.
So he can be a spy on the new
plot
Pope.
thickens.
Or sickens. And the Catholic cardinal in Scotland, who resigned when he was accused of improper sexual contacts with priests over the years, stops denying that he did that.
Is there proper sexual contact with priests?
Of course.
Polish democracy pioneer Lech Walesa spouts off a lot of anti-gay bigotry, but even his own son has publicly dissociated himself from his father's remarks.
A baby in Atlanta, reported to have been born HIV infected, they claim has been functionally cured, whatever that may mean. We will discuss that. There are lots of questions about this story that haven't been raised in the mainstream media.
I want to get to our speaker. I'm going to review a bunch of plays at the end of the show if we have time.
But we will start with our speaker. Our guest is the lovely Sarah Schulman, one of our all-time favorite and occasional guests here, who's here to discuss her new book, Israel, Palestine, and the Queer International, which has just been nominated for a Lambda Literary Award.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
As has her previous book, The Gentrification of the Mind, Witness to a Lost Imagination, also nominated for a Lammy Award. You are hot.
Yeah, I had a great year.
Yeah. But one of the things that made this past year interesting, at least, I don't know if we want to call it great yet, is this whole conflict with the LGBT Community Center here in New York, which was the original reason we asked you on, and then we started reading the new book and loved that, so we have a much broader field to discuss, but we want to start with that. You, of course, before I go too far, are the Distinguished Professor of the Humanities at the City University of New York College of Staten Island, novelist, playwright, longtime activist, ACT UP, Lesbian Avengers, ILGO, the Irish Lesbian and Gay Organization, and co-director of the ACT UP Oral History Project. But you are now involved in this whole question of conflict with the center and around the world on the queer community and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and all of this, which has gotten quite complicated. So a year ago, Queers Against...
2 years.
2 years ago.
2 years ago, Queers Against Israeli Apartheid was meeting at the center regularly, calmly, happily.
No, really.
Actually, it was Siege Busters.
Right. Siege Busters,
which
you're right.
was a queer and straight group that was involved with breaking the siege of Gaza.
Right.
So then the center said that's not gay specific and we don't like it, and they threw them out.
Under threat from an Israeli activist, or how do you want to describe Michael Lucas? Filmmaker, rapidly.
Boyfriend of the board, chair of the board.
I don't think we really know why the center did what they did. There's a lot of rumors.
Okay.
There's rumors.
Political involvement.
There's rumors that they were made afraid that some mysterious, punitive Jewish gay donor was going to pull their money out of the center, but this person has never been identified.
There were certainly threats made, but they appear to have been empty threats, but there were threats. And then maybe pressure from politicians, involvement of board members, whatever. At any rate, the center announced that it was going to cancel a Siege Busters dance and no longer allow Siege Busters to meet at the center. That provoked a firestorm of criticism and conflict within the community. There was a public forum to discuss this, which...
There was a petition signed by 1,500 people.
1,600.
1,600, including some very prominent queer Jews.
Yep.
Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum of the Gay Synagogue, Judith Butler, Joan Nessel, Alyssa Solomon, and we all had a community meeting with the center.
Right.
They came with some board members, none of whom were Jewish,
Right.
and told us that they were banning any discussion of Israel-Palestine from the center to protect the Jews. And we kept saying, hello, we don't want that. And it was very interesting because they had some kind of cliched ideas in their minds
Right.
about who real Jews are. That real Jews are these punitive rich people who will pull out their Jew money if you don't do what they want, although none of us know who any of these people are.
But who at the same time were so fragile that they would somehow be threatened by Siege Busters continuing to meet or hold events at the center.
And that's why I think that actually what happened is that some key politicians in New York City and some labor leaders who are very supportive of the Likud government and the current occupation policies of the State of Israel intervened, and they are the reason that this ban was put in place. I can't prove that, but
And
that's
it was
my
all very
impression.
depressing because of the censorship thing. It made me not want to go to the center or be a part of the center. It wasn't, and we couldn't change the policy by going to the board because they wouldn't even tell us where the board meetings were.
That's right. And in
Or
fact, the
agree to
center had not banned anyone in 25 years since they banned the North American Man-Boy Love Association.
And it just made no sense to us because we had seen the center as a neutral, supportive space where everyone was welcome to meet, whether it was a 12-step group or ACT UP, and social service groups and SAGE groups, and everybody was welcome at the center.
That's right.
And suddenly it had been transformed into this place of conflict. So, as Andy said, we all got depressed. No one wanted to go there anymore. This went on for a long time. And then Siege Busters sort of disappeared as a name, but the Queers Against Israeli Apartheid
Got to
was
meet
formed.
once at the center, and then they decided they'd have the moratorium on the issue.
Yeah, no one from any side of this was supposed to meet
Nothing happened
there.
at that meeting. I was there.
Yeah.
It was fine.
And there were some meetings, rump meetings in the lobby, and that was sort of peaceful under a sort of don't ask, don't tell policy.
We occupied I was a part of it. We occupied the first floor of the center one day for a big demonstration on the anniversary of it.
And they chose not to.
None of that moved them, but when Queers Against Israeli Apartheid invited Sarah Schulman to speak at the center, a story was done about it in the paper, which got around the world in the Gay City News. Yeah, they said no, you could not.
They banned me.
They banned Sarah
from reading my book at the LGBT Center.
Got people. And
because celebrity culture rules, and Sarah's a celebrity.
I wish that was the case. I think it was the image of a writer and a book being banned at the LGBT Center that was really more than anyone could take.
And a publicly funded center that gets a lot of government funding, engaging in censorship of someone who is a hero in the community and certainly well known. And this just made no sense to anybody.
So fortunately, there were some very brilliant activists, particularly Tom Leger, who you should have on this show, who's the publisher of Topside Press, who organized a petition where everyone who signed the petition, a single email in that person's name would automatically go into Glenda Testone's email
She's the
box.
director of the center.
Executive director.
And 1,032 people signed this petition, and she got 1,032 emails. So plus many, many, many phone calls and many complaints. And if you look at the names on the petition, it's a very broad group of people. And within 40 hours, they reneged and said, okay, no more ban.
Yeah.
However,
yes,
This was followed by a letter from politicians, including
Within 30 seconds.
Yes.
Literally.
That's right.
From Council Speaker Quinn and Deborah Glick of the Assembly and
Brad Hoylman of the Senate and
Jimmy Van Bramer of the City Council.
Right.
One member from each body put out this letter saying, we reject any criticism of Israel. We stand with Israel forever. We, just because this has changed at the center doesn't mean we're interested
we condemn any mention of the pink washing.
Yes, that too.
So this is the second time that Christine Quinn and other politicians in the city within 1 month have intervened against freedom of speech regarding Israel and Palestine. She had also signed a letter to Brooklyn College saying that they should not present events in the public university unless all sides are presented, which is antithetical to what academics do. Every single day there are colloquia and conferences in the city university and every university discussing specific points of view. So here you have a city government that's willing to stop free speech in the public university and in a publicly funded lesbian and gay center.
All right, so now you have written this book, Israel, Palestine, and the Queer International,
Right.
which is fascinating. I've
you.
read the whole thing, and it's a moving, enlightening, complex book that really will change a lot of people's minds, I think, if they take the time to read. And it's not that long, a couple hundred pages, easy read. You've traveled extensively in the Middle East. You've just come back from Abu Dhabi and Beirut, and you visited Palestine a couple of years ago. What's your understanding of this level of hysteria around this?
You know, my experience in life is that when people know that their position is indefensible, they become hysterical. And they make sure that no rational conversation can take place. What's so interesting about the response, I mean, basically, I'm part of a growing group of queer people around the world who do not want to be used by the Israeli government to justify the occupation. And when I say that, I mean that Israel is claiming that because they may be progressive in certain ways on gay issues, for example, there is gay pride in Tel Aviv, that this somehow means that they are a progressive nation and whitewashes the effects of the occupation. And so they're using the hard-won gains of LGBT people in Israel and around the world to justify something that's unjustifiable.
And let's make a couple of points. You're very clear in the book that this is not about attacking the right of Israel to exist. This is about holding Israel to standards of international human rights that everyone should be held to. And you're also very detailed about the very deliberate campaign that Israel has erected, because I was unaware of this and I thought, you know, how are you connecting these two? But the fact that they actually have sat down and planned out how to use the extent to which they are pro-LGBT to position themselves as a liberal society.
Right, and all of this is heavily footnoted in my book, so
Yes.
people can contest
Yes.
it. Saatchi & Saatchi, the advertising firm, did 3 years of pro bono work for the Israeli government in an effort to figure out a campaign in which they could re-market themselves in the eyes of the world, because their standing was so low that they were between Yemen and Sudan in global popularity. And what they came up with is something they call Brand Israel, which is a marketing campaign to remarket Israel as progressive in the eyes of the world. Now, the #1 demographic, if you want to convince the world of anything, is men 16 to 24. That is the most powerful demographic on Earth, and that is who they have targeted. The first thing they did was a campaign in Maxim magazine where it was called Women of the IDF, and it was female soldiers from the Israeli Defense Forces in bikinis on tanks with machine guns. And then when they surveyed readers of Maxim magazine, they now had a more favorable view of Israel. But gay men are a very significant part of that demographic because they have discretionary income that other people don't have. So 2 men's income is the most powerful consumer bloc in the world. And so they started things like charter flights from London and Berlin to Tel Aviv, a lot of marketing of Tel Aviv as a gay Mecca or, you know, this sort of thing. And also using the fact that Israeli men are soldiers as a way of, you know, telegraphing these hunky, sexy Israeli guys to the gay market. So it's been very, very deliberate. Now, the truth is that whatever the situation for gay people is in Israel, it has absolutely nothing to do with the occupation. And to try to create an equation between these two is absurd. But that is what they've been marketing on.
So, in our last 4 minutes,
yes.
or 5 minutes, a way out of all of this. I mean, you know, having been and visited in both sides, you know, I mean, your book ends, your conclusions in your book say no conclusions. I mean, that's the way you ended it.
Well, you know, I'm on the advisory board of Jewish Voice for Peace, along with Tony Kushner and Judith Butler and some other queer people. And we just need to have an honest conversation among Americans and in the U.S. media about why we continue military funding to Israel and how that can be tied to them being in compliance with international law. And I think many Americans would be in agreement with that standard.
Well, Chuck Hagel tried it, and who was not particularly pro-gay, but, you know, that's all he got asked about at his hearings. And he was forced, basically, to disown all of his nuanced statements about Israel and Palestine, and he ended up having to just toe the party line.
Well, I just want to invite everybody to come to this talk, which is going to take place on Monday at the LGBT Center at 7 o'clock, and we'll have an open discussion about all of these issues.
And also to a conference you're having at CUNY at the Graduate Center on April 10th and 11th, Homo Nationalism and Pinkwashing. There's a Facebook page for that, and people can go to the CUNY CLAG's website for that too. We do only have a couple of minutes, but one of the things that is, two things I want to ask you. A standard statement about this is, why do you support the Palestinians? They hate gay people a lot more than the Israelis do.
Well, there are 3 Palestinian queer organizations. There's a lesbian organization called Aswat. There's an LGBT group that exists on both sides of the wall called Al-Kaus. And there's a group called Palestinian Queers for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. And they clearly state over and over and over again that the 3 things that they need are feminism, gay liberation, and an end to the occupation.
And there's a lot more about that in the book.
Yes.
And how are you holding up under enormous attack? You get a lot of angry letters, I assume death threats.
90% of them from Alan Dershowitz.
You know, it's not bothering me because for some reason they don't actually engage anything that I actually say. I mean, if they were pointing to some line and saying, I disagree with you for this reason, it might be a little bit more challenging, but it's some kind of weird annihilating rage where actual conversation is impossible.
Well, I do recommend Israel, Palestine, and the Queer International as a fantastic discussion of all these issues, but I also want to ask you, just as a footnote, you are the co-director of the ACT UP Oral History Project, and your movie, United in Anger, about ACT UP is also out there, as is David France's How to Survive a Plague. What's going on with United in Anger, which is also a brilliant movie?
Thank you, Anne. It was directed by Jim Hubbard, and this film has been showing all over the world. We just showed it in Abu Dhabi and Beirut. It's going to be in Mumbai. We've shown it in Brazil, and it's now available in an educational DVD with a study guide.
Okay.
And we'll provide links to, you can learn more about the films and about Sarah and her book and everything else.
Write to andyhum@aol.com to get on our mailing list so you can get all the further details about this. Good luck Monday night at the Center at 7 o'clock on West 13th Street. Are you still doing the NYU speech too?
Yeah, but that's another date.
Okay. We'll include that on the website, on our note too. Great. And thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I'm sorry we don't have like 3 days to discuss all this.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, we got a lot of other news, so we will get to that as we slide Sarah off. And actually, the big headline now is what's going on with the marriage cases at the Supreme Court. Because
this month, March 26th and 27th, it really crept up on us.
Yeah.
We're before the Supreme Court with the Prop 8 case and the case against the Defense of Marriage Act.
So the Obama administration, which I said I didn't care if they weighed in on Prop 8, has weighed in on Prop 8. And what they said, the Department of Justice submitted an amicus brief, and they say that the California referendum passed by the voters, Proposition 8, outlawing same-sex marriage, violates equal protection guarantees of the United States Constitution. The Solicitor General has now been given time in the Supreme Court to argue on this. Has been added. The time has been expanded.
They're going to be there all day for 2 days.
2 days, yes. So this has become very interesting because, you know, just 2 years ago, the administration was arguing
it's a states' rights issue.
To uphold the Defense of Marriage Act as an appropriate federal government not recognizing legal same-sex marriages. They were arguing against same-sex marriage and arguing for the rationality of the Defense of Marriage Act. And in 2 years, they have now totally switched. Obama's come out for marriage, and it's a whole different landscape.
So they've evolved, but the other side has not. And Paul Clement, who is a very experienced litigator in front of the Supreme Court, who was going to be arguing the case to uphold the Defense of Marriage Act, is mainly using the argument that because same-sex relationships cannot naturally produce offspring, they do not implicate the state's interest in responsible procreation and child rearing the way.
Craziest
This argument was a winning argument in the New York Court of Appeals brought by Michael Bloomberg in 2005.
It was that crazy judge who we had to go yell at.
Well, there were a bunch of judges, and some of them appointed by Democrats that we lost.
Yeah.
And this was an argument that was developed in, I believe, Massachusetts back in 2003.
Well, let's take a look at our president, who, after the announcement of the department filing their amicus brief, was asked at a press conference about his support for an amicus brief on the Prop 8 case.
Yep.
Let's take a look at that.
I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about your deliberations and how your thinking evolved on that. Were there conversations that were important to you? Were there things that you read that influenced your thinking?
As everybody here knows, last year, upon a long period of reflection, I concluded that we cannot discriminate against same-sex couples when it comes to marriage. That the basic principle that America is founded on, the idea that we're all created equal, applies to everybody, regardless of sexual orientation, as well as race or gender, or religion or ethnicity. I think that the same evolution that I've gone through is an evolution that the country as a whole has gone through. And I think it is a profoundly positive thing. So that when the Supreme Court essentially called the question by taking this case about California's law, I didn't feel like that was something that this administration could avoid. I felt it was important for us to articulate what I believe and what this administration stands for. And although I do think that we're seeing on a state-by-state basis progress being made, more and more states recognizing same-sex couples and giving them the opportunity to marry and maintain all the benefits of marriage that heterosexual couples do. When the Supreme Court asks, do you think that the California law, which doesn't provide any rationale for discriminating against same-sex couples other than just the notion that, well, they're same-sex couples, if the Supreme Court asks me, or my Attorney General or a Solicitor General, do we think that meets constitutional muster, I felt it was important for us to answer that question honestly, and the answer is no.
Well, and given the fact that you do hold that position about gay marriage, I wonder if you thought about just, once you made the decision to weigh in, why not just argue that marriage is a right that should be available to all people of this country?
Well, that's an argument that I've made personally. The Solicitor General, in his institutional role going before the Supreme Court, is obliged to answer the specific question before them.
Yeah,
Just the
that's
specific
not
question.
entirely true. Because they could, Ted Olson and David Boyce are making the argument, among other things, that marriage should be available across the board nationally. They also have other levels of argument all the way down to just California. The Solicitor General has taken a middle ground that says if you provide equal benefits for same-sex couples, then you must call it marriage.
So states like New Jersey and Rhode Island, which have already done that, could be affected by this.
Right.
If they go that way.
You could immediately affect another 8 or 9 states and any subsequent states that try to do that.
So people just need to remember the court has about 8 different ways to rule, including kicking the can down the road on both cases by denying, well, at least on the DOMA case, by denying standing.
That's implicated in both cases. Standing is a question in both cases, but the administration has not argued for full national marriage rights for same-sex couples, although the court, in our dreams, could still decide to do that. Highly unlikely.
Just get it over with.
Now, millions, I'm exaggerating, but so many people have put in amicus briefs in this case, including Clint Eastwood.
Yes, he signed the Republican brief.
Against Prop 8.
Yes.
Yeah. And 212 senators and representatives filed the brief to overturn DOMA Section 3.
Who's standing up for traditional values?
Even if the court decides it on a rational basis review basis, which I agree with them on, should be plenty to overturn DOMA. Maybe my favorite amicus brief is from Brendan Ian Badejo and Chris Cluey, the football players. They have filed an amicus brief.
Why are you so surprised?
Well, you know, it's one thing to go out and talk about it. It's another thing to file an amicus brief.
Yeah, you know, we didn't do one from Gay USA.
We did not.
But I don't know why.
We missed the boat. The American Sociological Association filed a very important brief because they went after the right-wing talk about same-sex parents. And the right wing relied on this stupid study, I hate to even call it a study, the Regnerus study that came out of Dallas that was done by the right winger in Dallas. So now, of course, the right wing is pulling that out and saying, see, they shouldn't be parents. It was a horrible, discredited
study. They don't have much to go on.
But the American Sociological Association brief absolutely devastated that argument.
Their basic argument
great.
on the other side is it's always been that way, but it hasn't always been that way.
The San Francisco City Attorney's website has collected 47 different amicus briefs about Prop 8. If you are really looking to get into the details of this, you can go to their website at sfcityattorney.org to look at the amicus briefs. Also, there are demonstrations taking place both at the Supreme Court on both days of the argument, the 26th and 27th, but also around the country in various cities before and during these arguments. And if you are interested in finding out what's going on in your area or creating something in your area, you can go to lighttojustice.org. That's all about demonstrations, vigils, whatever, around these Supreme Court cases, so you can get involved. It's all quite fascinating and coming to a head very quickly. And of course, the American Foundation for Equal Rights, AFER, which brought the Prop 8 case in the first place, they have a lot of information.
It really has brought a lot of people out on the issue,
including former Senators Bradley, Daschle, Dodd, and Simpson, who filed a brief apologizing for voting for the Defense of Marriage Act.
Bradley got yelled at by Ann.
And apologized then.
Yes.
All right. In other marriage news, we're still watching what's going on in Illinois. They're hoping to it's past the Senate in Illinois. The governor is eager to sign it, but the House still has to pass it, and they're not sure they're at the needed 60 votes yet. Right. The right wing is fighting back very hard. We may or may not be able to pass it in Illinois.
Okay.
All right, other news.
Well, the Violence Against Women Act did go back to the House, and they did pass the reconcile bill with the LGBT provisions in it. So
They
good.
tried not to at first, but that failed.
Well, of course, it took a handful of Republican votes and a lot of Democratic votes. That's how they did it.
I think it was more than a handful of Republican votes.
Not a majority, though.
Certainly
it
not.
Wouldn't have gotten through the conference.
Nope.
And that's the thing. They're letting some of these things go through. They're not going to let all of these things go through, but they're letting some of these things go through because it's what lost them the last presidential election.
Our specific inclusion in this was, it's a non-discrimination clause. It says, in provision of services to people around domestic violence, you cannot discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity and expression. That is it. And so that was passed. Now, I don't know whether this will be implicated in this Mississippi case.
Mm-hmm. Well, we told you last week that a politician in Mississippi, in Clarksdale, Mississippi, Marco McMillian, 34, was running for mayor, and then he was murdered. And he was openly gay, and he'd worked in AIDS services and things like that. He was,
but he... We have a picture of him.
We have a picture of him there?
Yeah.
He was beaten and burned and all kinds of things.
Well, there's some dispute about whether he was beaten.
But they have arrested a suspect, Lawrence Reed, with whom he was 22, with whom he was believed to be intimately involved in some way. There's a picture of Lawrence, who was the
Well, the question is, were they lovers and who quarreled?
It is in dispute.
Lawrence's side is threatening to make a gay panic defense,
Yes, they are.
saying they weren't involved, and Marco just came on to him.
Apparently, he identifies the perpetrator, or alleged perpetrator, identifies as straight. That kind of thing.
A lot of rumors, a lot of confusion.
And they don't have a hate crimes law down there, so it's not being charged as a hate crime. But our side is asking for federal investigation to assist in the whole thing.
Right. Poor Bradley Manning.
Oh.
He's been in prison for years now without getting any resolution to his case.
Tortured, basically.
So he, some months ago, offered his own plea deal to the prosecution and said, I will plead guilty to...
10 of the 22 charges that he's facing. That makes him liable for up to 20 years in a military prison, followed by a dishonorable discharge, but it's not enough for the federal government and for the Obama administration. They want to go after him full bore, and I think they want to lock him up forever. And they want to establish that because he gave this stuff to WikiLeaks, and it got on the internet, that he was communicating with Al-Qaeda.
Exactly.
And that's the nub of their case.
Well, they said they found...
My goodness. I put a few things on the internet myself, and I hope Al-Qaeda doesn't read them. But if they do, I don't want to go to jail for the rest of my life.
I'm just glad they're not asking for the death penalty at this point. And speaking of legal issues, a bill has been introduced in Texas in the legislature to remove deviant sexual conduct from the laws there. This is one of these sodomy laws that remains on the books, even though all of those have been declared unconstitutional.
Even though it was the one that went to the Supreme Court in 2003 and we won. They wouldn't take it off the books. They're very obstinate. Well, they're thinking of leaving the country down there, aren't you? Also, we told you about how good Massachusetts was in terms of bathrooms and schools for transgender grade school students in elementary and secondary schools and things like that. And they were just going to be very open, and like you use the one with which you identify. And now there are some legislators who want to pass a law that says that you must use the one that corresponds to your genitalia. Or you have to have a special room that they can go, or the faculty room or something like that, because they want to stigmatize these kids.
Yep. Well, we told you also last week about Emerson College in Massachusetts, where a fraternity, Phi Alpha Tau, had been raising money for one of their pledges who needed top surgery, transsexual.
Transgender, yeah. Transsexual, okay.
And they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams and raised a lot more money, than he needed. And so they're donating the money to others who need it. And if you want,
how about covering it through Medicare for all? That's what I would like to see.
Well, if you want information about this situation, you can go to the Jim Collins Foundation website for more information about that.
Some good news.
Sure.
We now have the first openly gay Asian American on a seat on a federal bench. Her name is Pamela Kimai Chen.
We have a picture of her,
yes,
too.
we do have a picture of her.
Confirmed to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York.
And there are 4 additional openly gay judicial nominations that are pending from around the country.
One who would be the first on a federal appeals court.
Right.
But they are starting to go through and they're starting to get hearings. Similarly, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, there were some elections this week on Tuesday in various parts of the country, and openly gay Chris Anderson was elected to the Chattanooga City Council.
He beat a 2-term incumbent, and he's a former vice president of Young Democrats of America, and he's the second out LGBT official in the state of Tennessee.
Congratulations.
And congratulations to Sergeant Mitchell Grobeson in L.A., who has been fighting a discrimination. He's a police officer who's been fighting a discrimination suit there for 25 years. And it was finally settled. You know, he was really trying to, you know, it was settled one time, and then he went back, and there was more anti-gay stuff against him, so we finally settled it.
In Virginia, the pastor, Kenneth Miller, who was helping the ex-lesbian flee the country with her child so her former partner would not get any visitation or custody rights, has been sentenced, but the sentence has been suspended while other courts look at this.
The issue, the reason he's not going to jail right now is because they're questioning whether he couldn't be tried in Vermont for this charge when it should be maybe in Virginia. That's the dispute.
It's gone back and forth.
But there's, you know, the mother who was denied access to her child is suing him and obviously her ex-partner and Liberty University School of Law and the Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, because they all collaborated to get her partner out of the country with her child.
And she still hasn't been found. She's evidently wandering from place to place in Nicaragua. That poor kid has been dragged all over the world. All right, and a confusing local story here in New York at the Bronx Science High School, one of the elite city public schools, where 3 male members of the track team have been arrested and charged with sexual assault and threatening the rape of a younger teammate.
Apparently a big tradition of hazing there, which is not a good thing either. And this is stuff that crossed the line, allegedly, and it's really casting a spotlight on the culture there. And this is a very high-ranking academic school, but it's bad stuff.
Yeah,
it sounds like bad stuff, but you know,
again,
we don't know.
The details are confusing. I told you last week that the Westboro Baptist Church was threatening to show up at my alma mater, Vassar. The 4 of them showed up. Hundreds of people protested. They raised $100,000 for the Trevor Project around this. You know, someone said to me, fellow alumna said, you know, why do we pay attention to them? I said, I don't think we should pay attention to them. But on the other hand, this has brought the community together, local community, college community, other colleges in the area, and they've raised a lot of money.
The great pianist Van Cliburn died at 78. Not exactly a gay activist, but he did have a palimony suit against him.
Well, he had a young lover who sued him for palimony in 1996, and I don't think that went anywhere. But then
because they hadn't been together for many, many, many years. Got to strike while the iron is hot.
But he ended up in a relationship for the rest of his life with a guy named Thomas Smith. Evidently, they were very happy and out.
Good.
But the strange thing is, here's Van Cliburn, a relatively out gay international musical star. You know, he won the first Moscow International Piano Competition in 1958. I remember that
Tchaikovsky competition.
Vividly. You know, Rick Perry is sending tributes to him after his death and calling him a personal friend.
He was from Fort Worth.
As did Kay Bailey Hutchinson.
Well,
these horrible homophobes have no shame about their hypocrisy.
Well, maybe.
What?
If he had been more forthcoming and outright about standing up for civil rights for himself, maybe that they would not have praised him.
Well, he certainly was well known as being gay, and yet that did not stop them
kind of
from
gay. Well,
making
I mean,
tributes.
look, I don't know. I mean, we shouldn't go on and on and on about this, but.
The Boy Scouts have a very huge annual Boy Scout Jamboree that brings in tens of thousands of scouts from around the country to a national event.
And they were going to have performances by Train and Carly Rae Jepsen, and they were appealed to don't do this because it's an anti-gay organization. And once they were made aware of it, they said we didn't know it, and we weren't aware of it. You know, people aren't aware, and they don't concentrate on it, and they're not going unless they change the policy. You've got a chance there. And then this new show on National Geographic, Are You Tough Enough to Be a Boy Scout?
Tougher than a Boy Scout.
Are You Tough Enough to Be a Boy Scout?
Okay.
Is the title of the show.
Sorry.
Well, unless somebody mistyped it here. They refused to put any disclaimer on the show saying, you know, we know that this is an anti-gay organization.
I wouldn't expect them to do that. Why would they do that?
Because 12,000 people signed a petition to them to do that.
That's crazy.
And why do you think?
It's not going to happen.
Why do you think the center let Sarah Schulman in?
Well, fine. Have them get rid of the show, but they're not going to put it.
And we're losing
By
another.
the way, we're putting on this new show that celebrates the Boy Scouts, but we just want you to know the Boy Scouts are anti-gay.
Hey, we got
Please.
we got a disclaimer on the movie Cruising. That this does not represent gay life.
Okay.
And we're losing another gay bar in New York, the Rawhide, a legendary gay bar. New York is
Friendly
over. New York
gay
is
bar
over.
on 8th Avenue.
They want to raise the rent from $15,000 a month to $27,000 a month. But the San Francisco Eagle is reopening.
Shall we do international news?
Sure.
All right. Well, is the Pope the big international news everywhere all the time?
Well, you know, again, the gay angle on this is that his.
Show the picture of him with his
Take
boyfriend.
a look at these two. Where are they?
They're
the
coming
Pope
up.
and he was Monsignor Gonswine. There he is. This good-looking guy who's been on the cover of Vanity Fair in Italy and other places. This guy is at his side all the time. So now that he's the ex-Pope, they're going to live together. They're going to live together in the Vatican. He's going to be the ex-Pope, and he's going to be hidden. So
Oh, please. People have been living together in the Vatican for years.
they take every meal together. They're always together. Well, except that the Archbishop, the younger guy, is going to have a job during the day, and that's running the rest of the Vatican under the new
on the
Pope.
new Pope.
Well, I wouldn't put up with that yeah, okay. So, well, Colm Toibin was interviewed about this by Maureen Dowd, and he said, who wouldn't want a good-looking guy taking care of you for the rest of your life? I mean, it's a gay man's dream.
Well, the New York Times, as with every other mainstream news organization, is following this selection of the new Pope process ad nauseum. And they did a piece this week where they talked to Catholics in the United States about what they wanted and what they expected. And they interviewed this one guy, a 28-year-old guy from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, who said, I'm not saying change everything the church stands for, but you need to evolve with the times if you want to remain a viable religion. I thought that was the funniest thing I heard all week.
Well, they're totally resisting that.
The delusion that anyone thinks this church is going to change.
Well, things do change.
Oh,
they used
my
to support.
God.
They used to support slavery. Now, they did not support Cardinal O'Brien from Scotland, who did have to resign. And we told you about him last week. How he had to resign because he'd had this inappropriate stuff with priests that he'd hit on over the years. He also had a lover for a good period of time, which I knew about, but didn't tell you. Well, maybe because the guy wouldn't come out. He wouldn't acknowledge it.
The lover.
The lover. Well, neither would this guy. But actually, he has now acknowledged these activities, and he's apologized for them. But the interesting thing is, when he was appointed, he said the church needs to be more open about gay stuff, about women, very much like the stuff on that poll, about all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And Cardinal Ratzinger in the Vatican was reported to be incandescent and tried to stop his appointment. So when this guy offered his resignation to the then Pope, who's not the Pope anymore, it was accepted with gladness.
With alacrity. Big lesbian wedding at Tokyo Disneyland. Great coverage in the newspapers. Big event there.
Yeah.
Congratulations to them.
And then there's Lech Walesa.
At first they asked if one of the brides could please wear a tuxedo, but that was pointed out to them as inappropriate, and they said, "Oh, we're so sorry. Of course you can both
If they
wear
wanted
whatever
to wear
you
a
want."
tuxedo, it would be fine. And then there's Lech Walesa. Solidarity, Poland, first democratically elected leader there for ages.
Close to the Pope.
Very close to the Pope, and he just gave out these horrible statements against gays, saying that gay people need to adjust to smaller things, sit on the back benches, even outside the chamber. So the way the progressive
These are out gay politicians in Poland. He
first of all,
wants to do
his own son, who's in the European Parliament, condemned him for this and said that gays have rights and da-da-da. But the leader of the Progressive Party there, they've got an out gay member and a transgender member, and they for the next session of Parliament, they put them right in the front row where everybody could see them on TV. So good for the Polish.
Exactly, and someone filed a hate speech complaint against him, but he is saying he is not backing down from anything. He sticks by everything he said, but he's been misunderstood. Okay.
No, he's made anti-gay statements before.
Yeah, he has. All right, AIDS news.
AIDS,
well,
AIDS
of course,
and the baby.
The big story this week was about how this baby in Mississippi was, or wherever, maybe not Mississippi. Yeah, Mississippi was was treated 30 hours after birth. Was tested at birth with a PCR test, which looks for the virus, not an antibody test, because every baby born to an HIV-positive mother tests positive at birth because they carry the mother's antibodies.
Right.
So you have to test directly for the
You
virus.
got to concentrate on this, folks.
They
It's a little
tested. They say
complicated.
they tested for the virus. They found the virus. 30 hours after birth, they started socking the baby with a 3-drug combination. That went on for some months.
Which is basically post-exposure prophylaxis.
Exactly.
It's similar. It's what people get when they get a needle stick from an unknown source,
or have unprotected sex, or the condom breaks. You're supposed to go running to the pharmacy or your doctor or a hospital.
Yeah, you got to go get it.
And get drugs to prevent the infection taking hold.
It is not a little pill. It is a series of pills that you take over weeks.
Now, what is supposedly different here is that the infection had taken hold, and the thinking is that this drug onslaught cured the baby, got rid of the infection entirely.
Well, now, didn't the baby take the drugs for like 18 months and then stopped?
And then stopped. The mother and baby disappeared, and then they reappeared, and they tested the baby again, and they thought the virus would have rebounded because she had been off the drugs for a while. But they were amazed to find that the virus had not rebounded. Now, they have found viral particles in the baby still. There is no guarantee that the virus is not still hiding in the reservoirs.
She's certainly undetectable, but so are half the gay men I know who have HIV.
And how does this differ from post-exposure prophylaxis? It's all very confusing.
So when they throw the word cure around, then they call it a functional cure. Well, it does get confusing to people.
Functional cure is undetectable by their definition.
Well, the issue is whether you can eradicate the virus.
And whether she still needs to be taking drugs.
Right.
And since she is not, that is why they
I think they should monitor her.
I think that this is very complex and they ought to study it a lot more.
Now,
but the real thing is there are very few babies who end up with HIV in this country because most mothers get observed and diagnosed before they give birth, and they can intervene with drugs that then prevent the baby from being infected. Her problem was she didn't have that intervention before giving birth. Why not? Or did she have no prenatal care? Are people not testing routinely? And what about babies all around the world? Because 300,000 are still born with HIV around the world, and they need treatment.
Now, what about the sequester? How are you doing on the sequester? Are we really going to see big cutbacks in the ADAP program, which is what delivers drugs to people?
At least temporarily.
You know, I got an email from a viewer, like 30% of these ADAP programs, especially the ones that tend to cut back when there's budget cutbacks, are in the South. And this is putting people's lives in danger, so stop it.
New surveillance report from the Centers for Disease Control, 50,000 new infections in this country in 2011.
Terrible.
62% of all HIV positive people newly infected are men having sex with men. 79% of new infections in all men, young people, people of color. It's rising again. And the projections are that in 30 years, 50%, listen to this, in 30 years, 50% of gay men will be HIV infected again, and 70% of black gay men. If nothing is done, if we've forgotten the history, this is what's going to happen.
I mean, we're thinking of doing a show on prevention and where this is going and all this kind of stuff, because it's a great challenge, and I have not heard from anybody how in this environment where people with AIDS are essentially invisible because they're not getting sick the way they were, they don't display the way they did before with the symptoms. How do you get people to take precautions and follow them all consistently? It is very, very difficult, and I haven't heard a good answer to this.
What made it work before was the sense of imminent risk, and that's exactly what you're describing. We don't have that these days.
And it is also true that it is not going to kill you right away the way it did. That's also true. We do
have the drugs.
Because we do have the drugs.
And we're getting better drugs all the time.
There is a lot less fear. But I just must say, it is taking these drugs for the rest of your life is no picnic.
None at all. All right, moving on to entertainment news. I just have to say there was a great moment on American Idol this week where Nicki Minaj says to a contestant, a young woman, after she sang beautifully, Nicki says to her, "You are my wife, and how did you raise your sexiness another notch this week?" And the woman says to her, "I just tried to do my wife proud." A little lesbian banter on American Idol. It was very cute. Yeah.
Great.
You want to review some plays?
I will, but I also want to point out that we've learned this week that Whitney Houston was being extorted by somebody who threatened to expose her. Her FBI files came out, and they were going to expose her lesbianism.
Well, her mother hasn't figured it out.
I forgot to review Passion, the Sondheim play last week. I've given this thing 3 chances, and this was Classic Stage Company.
Yeah.
I'm just never gonna like that musical.
All right.
Okay?
Yep.
But I also saw Cinderella, went in with very low expectations, the Rodgers and Hammerstein, first time on Broadway, and it was, it's got a book by Douglas Carter Bean, so it's probably the gayest show in town. And it's there for the kids, but it also has a lot of adult humor. Mm-hmm. The next play I saw, and we do have a picture of it, is North Pool at the Vineyard. It's just an assistant principal who's kind of uptight. He thinks that one of his students has been vandalizing things in the school and brings him in for detention. And it becomes about a lot more than that. Mm-hmm. It becomes a rather very intense drama there by Rajiv Joseph, who did Bengal Tiger at the zoo, at the Baghdad Zoo. So I would recommend that at the Vineyard. And then I saw Belleville at the New York Theater Workshop. We have a picture of Maria Ditzia and Greg Keller there in that. I was bored for the first hour, and I was only depressed for the last 45 minutes. Now, I went with Peter Webb, who had a much better time than I did, and the New York Times gave it a very nice review. Don't go by me, I'm very crabby, but I was pretty bored.
I'm glad I didn't go.
And then the last play I saw was The Old Boy, a revival and a revision by A.R. Gurney. And I didn't really know what this was about. Mm-hmm. It was a prep school drama about the guy on the, Peter Rini there on the left, going back to his old school to give a speech, and he sort of gets back, that's his, a guy, Chris Dwan plays his former roommate. He was the old boy for this younger boy there. Who turns out, well, I don't want to give too much away about it. I'm just saying it's really good. It's got gay themes, and I was rather touched by it. The Old Boy at the Keene Company on 42nd Street.
I saw a movie that's opening this weekend that isn't gay, but is really shocking and depressing. It's called Greedy Lying Bastards.
Oh.
and it's about climate change and all the corporations who
The Koch brothers?
Yes, and their deliberate campaigns to put denialists forward and make them prominent in the conversation.
Wake up, America.
Really,
or we're all going
really
to burn up.
horrifying. Congratulations to Perez Hilton, who ends up having a baby boy.
With whom?
I don't know, but he's a father now. And everyone seems very excited that Madonna is going to present the Vito Russo Award to Anderson Cooper
at the GLAAD Awards on
Yeah.
March 16th.
Right.
Now, GLAAD, I got to say something. You know, we're glad that Anderson Cooper came out, but when you just, as soon as they come out, you give them, Vito Russo was a very proud and longtime gay activist.
Yep.
When you give the Vito Russo Award to somebody who came out 5 minutes ago, it's not setting much of a standard.
No.
And it just says you want to sell tickets. Well, I have to say, you know, a friend of mine said GLAAD's turned into a catering company.
And what is Lighthouse Beach on Fire Island going to turn into now that they're going to shut it down as a nude beach because things have become too raucous there? The policing of behavior.
Yeah, a friend of mine
city.
who has a place out there says the police come in once a year and arrest somebody in like the Judy Garland Memorial Park, and then that's it for the year, but they do it like once and it's unexpected.
Well, this looks like it's going to be a bigger crackdown, and things are getting too homogenized.
Yes, they are.
All right. All right. Well, we just want to remind you that our guest at the top of this show, Sarah Schulman, will be at the LGBT Community Center on Monday at 7 p.m. to read from her fascinating new book, Israel, Palestine, and the Queer International.
You get much more of a flavor than you did on this show.
Yes, we had limited time. And is also running this homo nationalism and pinkwashing conference at
St.
CUNY
Patrick's
in
Day is
April.
coming up in New York, and they're still keeping gays out of the Fifth Avenue parade, but I was at the one in Queens, and that was rather joyous and fun.
Yeah, well, it usually is.
Bye-bye.
And write to andyhum@aol.com if you want to get on our email list and get details of the things we throw at you too fast on the show. And we will see you next week.
Thanks for watching.